There are a lot of things on the minds of the American people, and it's really not January 6th. Democrats have enjoyed unilateral control of Washington for 17 months now, and we all know the results. Everybody can see what has been wrought by that. We've got record inflation, soaring gas prices, unhinged crime in our cities, and uninhibited illegal immigration. The truth is this. The Democrats could hire an army of broadcast media executives to try to boost their ratings, but it will not change the simple facts. This election will be about three I's and really nothing else: inflation, illegal immigration, and incompetence.
Welcome back. That was Louisiana Republican Mike Johnson slamming Democrats today for their focus on the January 6th committee hearings as voters look for leadership on the economy, he says. Let's bring in the panel to dive deeper. Former Florida Republican Congressman and NBC News political analyst Carlos Curbelo, Juanita Tolliver, who is a Democratic strategist and also an MSNBC political analyst, and also Josh Kraushaar, columnist at the National Journal. Thanks to all of you for being here. Josh, let me start with you right there and just get your reaction. Do you think that Democrats run the risk of focusing too much on January 6th and having these hearings come when we're following critical midterm elections as well, and not focusing enough on the economy and inflation?
So strictly from a political standpoint, the Republicans have a point that people, voters, tend to look forwards, not backwards. Trump made that mistake by focusing on litigating all these primaries about 2020 in his conspiratorial way. But there is a risk that Democrats try to make this a political issue instead of focusing on the very damaging substance that's being revealed at these hearings. So, this is, look, we're in a pretty tough time. The inflation is rising, gas prices way up, crime, mass shootings. Democrats need to be careful not to focus on what happened in the past, even as it's very important to the hearings right now.
Juanita, what do you make of that? And I've been talking to sources at the White House and Democrats who say, look, we are going to weave this into a broader narrative about Republicans in the midterms, the ultra MAGA narrative that they want to try to prove. But are you comfortable with that? Is there a risk in that?
I think it's important to clarify, because I was shaking my head no the whole time you were speaking, because the accountability components of the January 6th Select Committee hearings is critical. It's critical because the future of our elections depend on it. Imagine if Trump is not held accountable and he does this again in 2024. This election cycle might be the last one we recognize. So Democrats are right to spend energy there, and they're also spending energy on the economy. I think in President Biden's speech today to the AFL-CIO, he emphasized that he understood what people are facing right now, the struggle to pay their monthly bills, the struggle to pay for food and the rising costs of things. And so he's talking about ways to alleviate some of that pressure on families, reducing the cost of food, holding gas companies accountable, releasing more barrels of gas to help alleviate some of that pressure.
Carlos?
Well, look, I think two things can be true. Number one, we do have to focus on what happened on January 6th. It was the biggest assault against our Constitution, against our democracy, perhaps ever. I mean, the Civil War, I guess, competes. But Democrats also can't lose focus and can't seem out of touch. They can't be like Donald Trump talking about previous elections all the time. So Republicans are being disingenuous in the sense that they're saying we should only be talking about the three I's, as Congressman Johnson said. We can talk about all these things at once, and we should, because they're all important to our country and to the everyday lives of Americans.
Could the hearings hurt Trump-backed candidates? I mean, this is really going to be the first set of primaries that we'll have in the wake of these hearings getting underway. We know that 20 million nearly Americans tuned in to the first hearing.
The hearings are definitely going to have at least a marginal impact in 22. It's not going to be the number one issue, and Democrats need to accept this. No, very few people are going to go to the polls and say, I'm voting because of what happened on the 6th of January.
Especially in Republican primaries. This is not going to impact there.
But when this will really matter is in 2024, if Donald Trump does decide to run for the presidency. That's when the work of this committee will come into focus.
It will be interesting to see if there are Republicans watching the hearings, looking at the damning evidence, and maybe having second thoughts about Trump running again, even if they like him. Do they want to relitigate 2020 all over again? I also would say that some of these Republicans in midterms who endorse the Stop the Steal, who endorse January 6th, who were there on January 6th. They're on the ballot. Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, Ohio swing district candidate for Congress. There are candidates in these big races that could lose it for the Republicans.
And I think that's an important point to bring up, because this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening where you have a number of Trump-backed candidates who are running. Some of them have won their primary races so far. And it also comes as former President Trump is mulling his own run. I just had a really fascinating conversation with Congressman Tom Rice. He is in the fight of his political life in South Carolina. At the very end of the interview, I asked him if he would vote for President Trump again if he wins the nomination. Take a look at that exchange. Would you, as a Republican, support whoever the Republican nominee is, even if it's Donald Trump?
The way that I would support Donald Trump, and I think there's no way he can win the presidency. I think in a primary, I would support pretty much anybody else to be the Republican nominee. But if he was the Republican nominee, the only way I'm not saying I would vote for the other side, but the only way I would support him is if he apologized to the country for what he did following the election and leading up to January 6th.
Carlos, that wasn't a no.
Well,
what does that tell you?
Kristen, I know Tom Rice. I served with him on the Ways and Means Committee. He is a man of total integrity. He's very conservative. What Tom Rice told you is that he's not voting for Donald Trump because Tom Rice knows that Donald Trump will never apologize for anything. So Tom Rice is out when it comes to Donald Trump in 2024, and we'll see what happens to him tonight. But he's been very courageous.
Josh, what did you make? Go ahead. What did you make of that?
Politically, even someone who's as anti-Trump as Tom Rice still knows the Republican electorate likes Trump, right? There are even people who want Trump to move on, but they still like Trump's job as president, and that's, I think the voters still voting, Republican voters still voting in South Carolina, so I think that's a little bit of a nod to just how pro-Trump the Republican electorate is.
And, Biden is on the ballot as well, in some senses, and you have some candidates who are being challenged by the left, some Democrats. What do you think his impact is going to be on some of these primary races for Democrats that are close? And again, tonight we're really more focused on the Trump effect. But when you start to think about the general election, you have a number of Democrats who are quite concerned. Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, for example, is watching who wins these races against her tonight very closely because she knows she could be facing a really tough re-election battle in November.
Yeah, I think about those Democrats, and I think about the fact that one of the things that Biden did mention in his address to AFL-CIO was the contrast, the alternative of what the nation would get if they do elect MAGA Republicans, which we know they've been running with that frame for weeks now and testing that out. It's a question of whether or not voters are going to go for it. And I've also heard some reports about Democratic-backed outlets and strategists promoting some of these MAGA candidates, which in my opinion feels like a bit too much of a risk to take because there's no guarantee general election voters will reject them, right? Trump still got millions and millions of votes.
I actually think that's a huge scandal in California. House Majority PAC funded an ad criticizing David Valadao, who looks like he survived his primary, for impeaching Donald Trump. I mean, if that's not cynical and hypocritical, I don't know.
And risky, potentially.
$20 million, I reported, is going into these Republican primaries electing MAGA Republicans. It makes the Democratic argument that Republicans are a threat to democracy a little bit hollow if they're
By the way, they're doing this
elected.
as the January 6th committee is doing its work. The optics are horrible.
Well, again, and it's potentially risky. When we talk about, from their perspective, I would imagine, given that, as you're saying, the broader goal is to defeat these candidates. When you talk about President Biden, though, something fascinating happened over the weekend, which is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez declined to say she would support him in 2024. How big, Josh, take it, how big of a problem is that for the president?
It's a big deal. I mean, the progressives never really like Biden, and now that they haven't gotten anything delivered, not big legislation accomplished, they're starting to rebel. So you're going to hear more of that. It's not just AOC. There are a lot of progressives getting restive.
I don't think they don't like Biden. I think they feel like they've been pulling Biden the entire way. They've been pulling for bits and pieces this entire administration and haven't had it delivered on through him. Remember, Biden ran as a candidate who had 20 years of Senate experience, who could get deals done. Every time it came time to deliver on a deal, it didn't happen. And so those progressives are looking like what gives. And that also reflects some of the energy of the broader electorate, too.
Well, a lot at play, a lot to watch. Thanks to all of you for being here. Really great conversation. Carlos, Juanita, and Josh.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.